What is your freedom worth to you? Each of our guests had a light bulb moment. They longed to live rather than merely exist. They smashed through their fears and programmed minds, trusting themselves, their faith, and their survival instincts, leaving the guilt, fear, oppression, and drudgery of their past for a brighter future. They took a brave and courageous step into freedom. This is their story of how they got a life. Welcome to Get a Life podcast, Ex-Cult Conversations. You matter, and so does your story.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Get a Life Ex-Cult Conversations. I am Cheryl, and with me today is Richard and Steve from New Zealand. Welcome, guys. Today's podcast is a rather important one. So I guess my message is to buckle up and we're going to just jump right in. Welcome, Steve. Thanks so much for coming on here and about to explode a very, very dramatic story. So I'm going to hand it over to you right away so we can dive right in. So just introduce yourself and just let the listeners know where you're from and dive into what you're going to share with us.
Good. Well, I'm Steve Simmons. I'm from Auckland, New Zealand. I was closely involved in what I regard as a pretty big scandal involving an office fit-out company called Unispace, which was apparently owned by Gareth and Charles Hales, the sons of Bruce Hales, the leader of the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. Most of the story relates to work done by Unispace for OneSchool Global, which is the schooling system in the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. It's got close to 10,000 students worldwide, I think spread across something like 135 campuses. This story covers a period of about 6 years from 2014 to 2020, which is when Unispace was sold. And I think it's time it was all brought out into the light of day. All the significant players in this story claim to be Christians, and not just any common Christians. They claim to be the only true Christians. As such, you'd think it'd be reasonable to expect that the Word of God, the Bible, would, particularly the words of Jesus himself, that guide them in everything they do. And one thing that Jesus said was, I think it's in John 3, verse 20, Jesus said, "Everyone that does evil hates the light and does not come to the light, that his works may not be shown as they are. But he that practices the truth comes to the light, that his works may be manifested, that they've been wrought in God." So, on that basis, I think the players in this story, I don't think they should have any issue at all with it being brought into the light to show that their works have indeed been wrought in God. I was actually advised to get a lawyer to vet what I planned to say before I spoke about it publicly. I thought about that fairly hard because I know from first-hand experience that the brethren are very litigious and don't hesitate to take legal action to silence anyone they think might be about to reveal anything incriminating, especially if any of the Hales clan is involved. And as we well know, money's no object. They use the very best lawyers, not necessarily the most ethical and honest, but the most ruthless. And then I thought, well, I'm only going to say what I believe is the truth. And if I do that, I think God will stand by me. So if Bruce and the brethren want to take legal action against me for speaking about the truth, speaking about facts, things that have happened, as far as I'm concerned, that'll be irrefutable proof that they've got no connection whatsoever with Christianity. No doubt there'll be an attempt to spin this story as opposition to God and to the testimony or whatever. I believe the body of the brethren will come round once they know the facts. The brethren in this Auckland area where I live. They know my character. They know that I'm not seeking prominence, and I'm not vindictive. They know that I generally stand up for what's right. So as far as I'm concerned, let them try to bring legal action against me. They might find they're up against a God with truly unlimited power. I'm happy to leave it to anyone watching this podcast to judge for themselves whether or not what's happened is in accord with Christian principles and whether or not the persons involved were acting like Christians should. I've been trying to get this all out into the light of day for the past 10 years since it first came up, and there was an attempt to scrub it up a few years back, but turned out to be nothing more than a whitewash. And probably my persistence in trying to have it all looked into is a good part of the reason why I was shut up 4 years ago and then excommunicated 2 years ago. I believe everything I'm going to say is supported by evidence and witness and facts. I've got a lot of evidence and witnessed facts on record. And at the same time, if I say anything that's false or defame anyone unfairly, I'll gladly make a public retraction and an apology. I guess it's worth doing a bit of an intro to the entities and the personalities involved, because the story can get quite complicated. So the school and the trusts, the Brethren schools were started, I think, in the mid-90s. At first, they were basically just a loose structure to support homeschooling. Gradually, over the years, they became more and more like proper schools with buildings and full-time staff and so on. I think there was 15 campuses in New Zealand. Up until a few years ago, all the New Zealand campuses were operating under the name of Westmount School. I think they're all OneSchool Global now. There was a separate local trust for each campus, and that usually had trustees from each of the cities or towns that were part of the campus. So each campus may have comprised 3 or 4 or even 5 towns or cities, and generally I think there was trustees from each place were on the local trust. The Auckland campus had students from Papakura and Pukekohe, and our local trust was called the Hillsborough Education Trust because when it was first set up, it was based in a suburb called Hillsborough. I think we had about 11 trustees at the time I started the story. Some of the trustees on the Hillsborough Education Trust had been there since its inception, including my first cousin, Neville Simmons, and his brother-in-law, Greg Mason. As well as being founding trustees of the local trust, they were both on the national Westmount Trust, which was like an umbrella over all the New Zealand campuses. And I think they may have been also trustees on the Global Trust too, but I'm not sure about that. But if they weren't, they were certainly very closely involved in all the major decisions and the direction of the schooling worldwide.
In 2005, 7 members of the PBCC admitted to a $1 million campaign to try and swing the New Zealand general election in favour of the right-wing National Party. They also hired private investigators to stalk Prime Minister Helen Clark. The plan backfired when it was exposed a few days before the ballot and tipped the election the other way. The press dubbed the guilty Brethren members the Secret Seven. They included Neville Simmons, Greg Mason, and Andrew Simmons. Newspaper reports at the time also said that Neville and Andrew Simmons had a long-standing business relationship through their office furniture business, Aspect Interiors, with Bruce Hales and his Sydney office furniture business, and that Greg Mason's firm, Pump and Valve Specialties, also had a business relationship with Hales Brothers pump business in Sydney.
The global headquarters of the Brethren School was in Sydney, and Bruce Hales was the ultimate authority for everything relating to the Brethren affairs. But of course, he had quite a team of people working under him. John Anderson was one of the most prominent. Some of Bruce's sons, I think especially Gareth, they were also very much involved. And the whole Brethren schooling system had been set on by Bruce's father, John Hales, in the early 90s. And Bruce and John Anderson had been the main driving force in turning his vision into reality. I became a trustee of the Hillsbury Education Trust around 2004 after one of the other trustees moved out of Auckland. I was responsible for finance and IT, but I ended up being a bit of a dog's body, and I put in thousands of hours over the years, never charged a cent for it, as did many others. So then a little bit of a background as to Unispace and the key personnel. Unispace was an office fit-out company headquartered in Sydney. I think it sort of grew out of the business that Bruce Hales had started back in the 80s called Archway House. And then a bunch of other office fit-out companies around the world were merged in to make one big global organisation called Unispace. There was one in Auckland called Aspect Interiors, which was run by Neville Simmons and his brothers Andrew and Jack. And that was one of the companies that became part of the Unispace group. So I don't know how the actual ownership structure went, but outwardly, at least, it was just one big organisation. If you looked on the Unispace website, it was, it had offices in New York and London and Paris and Auckland and Sydney, whatever. And as far as I know, when it was sold to about 2020, as far as I know, it was sold as a global business. So obviously Gareth and Charles Hales would have been the main shareholders and directors, but I'm fairly sure that Neville Simmons and perhaps Andrew Simmons to a lesser extent, they were fairly high up in the management of the whole thing. And at least either Neville or Andrew seemed to go over to Sydney pretty much every week.
Just to clarify, are you saying that some of the school directors were also directors or part of the management of Unispace?
Yes, that's clear, yeah. That's right. Definitely the case, yeah. I think it's quite likely that Bruce Hales himself had some financial interest in Unispace. Even if he didn't, I'm sure he would have been very closely involved with what was going on and would have given boys a lot of advice, known closely what was happening all the time. Unispace they were chasing large corporate customers like government departments and banks and so on, and they did a lot of multi-million-dollar fit-outs. Seemed to be really going places. In Auckland, they rented offices near the top of a waterfront tower with a fantastic view over the harbour. It was pretty swish. Good on them. I'm no issue with any of that. But yeah, as you say, they were, here we had Unispace directors and the guys at the top of the school, they were the same people. So, which is interesting. So in Auckland, we'd built a brand new 2-story classroom block. Yeah, you can't, not a very good photo that, I'm sorry. It was just taken off the website, but it was quite a nice building, 2-story, all solid concrete, tilt panel and everything. You can't see at the left of that image, there's a big hall as well, which was part of the same project. So we built this new block in 2009. It opened, I think, cost about $5 million. And prior to that, the whole school had been cooped up in a small building on an adjacent property, which was very, very cramped. And when the new block opened, it was for the senior levels only, and the junior classes kept on using the old school, which dated back to around 2000 or whenever. Yeah, you can see there, the blue is the new piece of land with the senior block and the hall on the right of the main block. But then in red, the red circles what we used to have as the school, and those little buildings in the semicircle or quarter circle shape that was housing all the years from, I don't know, year 8 to 13 or thereabouts. So it was very cramped. And then, anyway, so we'd all moved in and settled down into this new block. It was going right. And then towards the end of 2013, Neville Simmons told our trust that all the schools worldwide were going to move away from the traditional classroom model, and they'll start using this new self-directed learning model, in which students are given projects and study guides and so on. They have a little bit of time in a classroom with teachers, but then they're left to sort of work at their own pace and in the manner that best suits their individual styles. So you might have some people might prefer to sit with their feet up in a lazy boy, or some might prefer to work at a desk on their own in a little cubicle, or some prefer to work in a group. You can kind of choose your style and find a little place to do that. So the main practical component of this change was going to be that every campus in the world would have a large modern learning centre with all these different workspaces and resources in one place. And 3 campuses had been selected for the pilot learning centres. There were 2 in New South Wales, I believe, and Auckland. And none of this is documented because Neville didn't want discussions about the project to go in the trust minutes for some reason. The trustees were in no doubt that this had come from Bruce. He was 100% behind it. It may have even initially come from him initially. I'm not sure as to that, and of course it went without saying that the project would be done by Unispace. There's never any question about that. So obviously big conflict of interest here.
So just to go back a little, it would be very abnormal, wouldn't it, for, in a normal school trust situation, for someone to request that a whole new project is put in place without anything being recorded in the trust notes and minutes of the meeting. Is that right?
Yeah, and I think it's probably almost bordering on illegal. I think trustees have an obligation to take minutes of everything that's discussed, everything that's arrived at. I think it would be probably an obligation, a legal requirement.
Yeah, that was my understanding of the minutes of a trust meeting are actually a legal document.
Yeah,
they are
the de facto legal document. So, yeah, sorry. Carry on. That's interesting. Yeah,
Neville didn't provide any quote. There was never any quote provided to the trust for the job. But Neville, all he would say is that it was going to be a good deal, and finally, he mentioned a figure of about $300,000. Actually, my son-in-law heard Neville say early on, just privately, not in a trust setting, at a private setting, that they were going to do the project at cost. Anyway, but so if any of us, there was sort of several layers in the trust. There was the very top dogs, and then there was a sort of a middle layer of people who were with sort of titles and things like that, who didn't actually do a lot of work perhaps, but they were there to provide the trust with their wisdom and so on. And then there was 2 or 3 of us that actually did stuff. Anyway, none of the trustees had any, if any of us had any doubts about giving the job to Unispace without getting alternative quotes, or without even knowing the price. We were just too scared to ask, I guess, because raising any question about it would have looked as though we were going against Bruce Hales. So we just sort of acquiesced and went along with it. So the plan was to start work as soon as demolition work as soon as the school finished for the year. This is 2013, and in New Zealand the school year finishes early to mid-December, and then the idea was that the whole project would be largely completed by the time school started again early in February. And so the trust meekly sort of consented to the project going ahead, and the demolition started just before Christmas. Then there was a bit of a little break over Christmas, and then a couple of weeks later, early in 2014, Neville and his family went to live in the States for a couple of months. Just a day or two before Neville left, he emailed me the invoice, which was $648,000 plus GST, having told us the job was going to be around $300,000, and it was going to be paid in 3 stages. The first payment was due about the end of January, from going by my memory, and there was a note to phone him, so I did. This was a Saturday, I think, and he explained that he and his brothers, Andrew and Jack, they were also shareholders or whatever of Unispace. They would each make a donation to the school of $100,000, which would bring the total price down to something like $350,000. And of course, he didn't put that in writing. He couldn't put it in writing. It just had to be a phone message. So I suppose so it could be denied if the shit hit the fan or whatever, or I couldn't forward it to any authorities. So I was a bit stunned, to say the least, but I sort of sat on it for a day or two. And then I told an older trustee. He was like he was the chairman. He was the father of the trust, or the grandfather, I guess. And he immediately hit the roof, and he said, as far as he was concerned, that's illegal, and it would expose the trust, because the IRD in New Zealand was actually doing a bit of an investigation into various brethren entities and things at the time, and he thought it might expose us to scrutiny that we didn't need. So he asked me to call a special trust meeting. Neville had left Auckland with his family in the meantime, so he wasn't present. I think the trust meeting was on the Monday, and I think Neville had left on Sunday. So all the trustees I set out the facts of what had happened, and all the trustees were very, very concerned, mostly as to whether or not it was even legal, not so much whether it was fraudulent. From my point of view, one of the main worries was that the trust had actually very little cash in hand. With the running costs of the school had been steadily climbing. We were still paying off our new building project, and earlier on we used to have fund days pretty much every year, and some of them we raised like $2 million, but they sort of started to fade away a bit, those really big fund days by this time. And a lot of brethren were starting to sort of feel the pinch, because there'd been the global recession about 2008, 2009, hadn't there? And it had sort of, a lot of brethren had to sort of retrench a little bit, and there wasn't the levels of money sloshing around that there had been earlier. So I was actually, I was concerned about the legality of it, of course, but my main concern was how we were going to even pay for it. So anyway, the trustees decided they'd ask Michael Powell about it. He's a smart brethren accountant from Hamilton, and he's very clued up about tax and charity law and so on. And so he came up to another special trust meeting we had a couple of days later, to speak about it, and he told us that in his view it could be contravening tax law and trust law. Trust law because the trust was actually legally required to act in the interest of the beneficiaries, which of course is the local brethren, and the trust hadn't even asked for any competitive quotes. In the meantime, Greg Mason, that's Neville's brother-in-law, is also a senior trustee and also a co-leader of the Brethren Assembly in Auckland, along with Neville. Neville and Greg had quite a cosy relationship there as the sort of co-leaders, joint leaders of Auckland. And anyway, Greg had obviously got in touch with Neville and explained what was going on. And Neville must have filled him in on some of the inside story, no doubt, as to what the Hales reaction would have been. Sort of Neville and Greg would have probably known what was, what the Hales reaction to it all was too. And so Greg's a pretty savvy politician, and he quickly changed from being one of the loudest voices protesting about it to strongly advocating for it to go ahead.
Wow.
So anyway, like, talk about changing horses in midstream. It was just as slick as you could imagine. Yeah, he was going that way, and then he was going that way. But anyway,
so just to kind of clarify for people who are not familiar with the Brethren system, in each congregation, and I imagine the Auckland congregation would be quite large, several hundred.
There was 500 or 600 brethren at that time.
So in each congregation, there's an informal one or two brothers who, in brethren terminology, take the lead, but they're like the spiritual leaders for the congregation. And those persons will be in direct touch with Bruce Hales about all the spiritual and, for that matter, financial matters of the congregation. And they would be the people who exercise spiritual authority within that congregation. They provide the connection to the global leadership, which is the Hales family. And so these people, Neville Simmons and Greg Mason, they had a finger in the Unispace pie, or at least
Greg
Neville. Greg didn't. Neville did. Neville was a Unispace manager or director. He was also a school director, and he was also, a de facto, a spiritual director, if you like, of the Auckland congregation. Is that the situation?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, obviously, unlike most churches around, the spiritual leaders, there's nothing official about it. They're not appointed, and if they step out of line, they can get demoted quite quickly, and somebody else will slide in. But they're not. The new person won't be appointed formally or anything else. It's just a totally informal thing, isn't it? But
they wield very considerable power over the congregation by virtue of their connection.
Exactly. Yes, the brethren would be aware that they are in touch with a man they regard as infallible, and therefore, they do have a lot of power. So anyway, so there must have been some bit of frantic activity going on behind the scenes, because we hadn't got any alternative pricing, but Unispace was going to have to get the job. So anyway, so somebody came up with the bright idea that we can just get a couple of other quotes from two other companies. It's not just any other companies. We didn't just sort of look on the internet or in the yellow pages and find a couple of other office fit-out companies to give us quotes. It was so there was a couple of other brethren businesses in New South Wales, office fit-out companies, but they both had strong connections, links to Bruce Hales, to UBT, to OneSchool, and so on. They were owned by the brethren, and one submitted a price, from memory, it was just slightly below the Unispace price, and the other was a bit more expensive, which was quite a coincidence. But neither of them they hadn't even come across to Auckland to visit the site or spoken to any of the trustees or anything. It was just a
box ticking exercise.
And then the trust got a letter from OneSchool Global, or from Mark McKenzie, who I think might be Bruce Hales' son-in-law, recommending that because Unispace had a branch in Auckland, they had the experience and expertise to do the job. They'd already started work on the project and so on and so on, and that we should use Unispace. So here was like a directive to the Auckland Trust from the main driving organisation in Sydney that Auckland should use Unispace to do the Learning Centre project.
Extract from the minutes of the Hillsborough Education Trust meeting, March 2014. Project 20 team leader Mark McKenzie has provided a peer review on our Learning Centre project, including costs, etc. He has confirmed that it is very comparative to the recently completed Darks Forest project. Aspen Interiors has provided an alternative quotation for our Learning Centre project. GCM to forward peer review and quotes ASAP with recommendation trustees should review and acknowledge with urgency.
So all of that is, it kind of meant that we were under pressure to just carry on, resume the project. The project had been stopped, and we were just basically put under pressure to resume it. So all the trustees, except for Morris Clist, the older brother, and me, they all voted to just resume the project, tell Unispace to carry on, mainly because everyone knew that Bruce Hales was closely involved in the project and come from him. He was sort of linked to Unispace, and everyone knew that Bruce Hales was basically so close to the Lord Jesus that he could hear his heartbeat, so he couldn't be wrong, so. And then actually one of the trustees, a younger trustee, he just suddenly resigned at that time. He didn't say why. He just said that something like he had other commitments or whatever. I was fairly sure that he resigned because he just didn't want to get involved in this sort of shambles. But and he confirmed that later on, like several years later, he confirmed that was the reason why it got off the trust. So they finally they talked Morris around after a bit. So I was the only holdout. Like, I was holding up the project being resumed just because it just didn't smell right to me, the whole thing. In any case, the trust just literally, it didn't have the money to pay for it. So, which to me is that's one of the main points in righteousness, is that if you don't have the money to pay for a project, you don't do it. So anyway, but a lot of pressure was put on me. And of course, anyone that has never been pressured by having the Hales name dropped, it's a bit hard to describe, but the pressure is pretty intense. So anyway, in the end, I really had no option but to agree to it being restarted, and I did that, but under protest. So they finally restarted the project around the same time as the students went back to school in early February, and obviously that was quite a lot of hassle because the workmen working in the building while students were trying to learn, and it should have been ready for them by the start of the school year. A few weeks after the project had been restarted, an invoice arrived at the school from Chubb. They looked after the school's fire alarms and sprinklers and so on, and they used to do regular inspection because it's a school. They would come, I think, every 3 months or so, and just check all the sprinklers and the fire alarm call points and all that sort of thing. And their bill was usually, from memory, it was somewhere around $200 or $300 per time. And then a bill came in from the same company for close to $3,000.
Oh, wow.
And the office lady forwarded it to me to check. She, if it was an ordinary invoice, she'd just approve it and process it for payment. But she forwarded it to me to check, and I thought, what's going on here? And I looked into it a bit further, and I realised that it was addressed to Charles Simmons, who's Neville's son, who also worked at Unispace. And so I thought, okay, this is a Unispace bill, not a Hillsborough Education Trust bill. And okay, so it's for the fire plan or something or other. And then I remembered seeing in the invoice that Neville had sent me, there was it was itemised a bit, and there was a line item for the fire plan for the new learning centre. So I thought, I'll look that up and see what they charged us for it. So in the invoice from Unispace, the fire plan was just under $9,000. 3 times the cost price. And I thought, what the hell is going on here? Neville had assured the trust that the pricing was going to sort of, be a good deal and whatever. And I mean, I was, as a trustee, I worked diligently as I possibly could to sort of keep bills as low as they could be. And, if I did any work for the trust, I either didn't charge them at all. Like if I provided items, I either gave it to them for free or I charged it on at cost. Mm-hmm. I just wasn't expecting these sort of margins. I was wild. So then I thought, I wonder how how all these other items stack up on the Unispace invoice. Things like carpet and because there was an Auckland brother that supplied carpet of the kind that Unispace were putting down in the learning centre. Not sure if they used him or not, but anyway, so I asked. He actually happened to be a trustee as well. So I asked him how much carpet for this many square metres would cost, and from memory, it was something like 15 or 16,000. That's what he would have charged the school, and Unispace charged something like 51,000 for the carpet, same carpet. And it was the same with all the items, like the chairs. My brother-in-law, also in Auckland, he supplies office chairs, and I don't know if they're using his chairs or not, but the chairs, total bill for the chairs came to something like over 100,000. And there was something like, I don't know, there may have been 100 or 120 senior students, and there was over $100,000 worth of chairs in this learning centre, apparently. For
myself, sitting here, and when I used to talk to my mom, man, she would be frantically baking all the time for this school.
Yeah.
And I think the hard part for me to swallow in this whole ordeal up until this point is that how many wives and sisters and like there's everything is always supposed to be going to support OSG. And then here you have these people literally marking things up 3-4 times a month that they're supposed to be, while everybody else in the community is frantically trying to come up with that money and not even know that they're trying to come up to this money for this kind of a project. It's just absolutely so hypocritical of the demands that they put on. I just remember talking to my mom, and she was so stressed out. I mean, she loved to do her baking, but I mean, she had health issues, and she'd be sometimes baking 18, 19, 20 of these one loaves of bread that everybody liked just for money for OSG. Like, this is just it's just not right at all. And it really makes me angry.
It made me angry too, believe me. And it's not like these guys were sort of, they weren't just ordinary middle class people. These were all multimillionaires already. Mm-hmm. You know, they were all very, very wealthy, very, very comfortable, lived in beautiful homes, drove beautiful vehicles, had a office near the top of this waterfront building, whatever, you know, and as you say, brethren, like slaving away, baking days and all that sort of stuff.
And that's what the Campus and Co, right? They use that Campus and Co front for its funding. Yes. OSG, it's funding for OSG. Yet here we have a prime example of where all these hardworking free labor of the sisters and the people are, I'm like just completely devoted to this, having no clue where their money is being supplied to, where it's not even going to the school. It's going to some outrageous project like this and I'm sure this isn't the only one example that we're just now witnessing and bringing forward. I'm sure this is happening everywhere in some form everywhere.
It happened everywhere. Yeah.
It breaks my heart. It makes me just want to cry inside of just like, I just think of my mom and how bad her health was, but yet she would sit there from first thing in the morning all day long, preparing all this stuff that it's just, I wish that I could just go and just drop off this information to all of them and be like, you're not really supplying the OS, your children and your grandchildren with this school. You're actually putting into the pockets of multimillionaires.
That's exactly it. Yeah, that's exactly right. You've expressed my feelings exactly. So anyway, there was a local brother in Auckland, and he was a quantity surveyor. He was trained and qualified as a quantity surveyor, and I asked him to help me just work out a realistic value for the whole job. He came round. We went round after hours and went through the work, putting the ceiling in, the air conditioning, the carpet, the wall linings, the furniture, and everything. We went through it line by line, and of course we could have got volunteer labour even to do a lot of the demolition work at least, but Unispace did the whole lot, and charged for it. We worked out that we could have done the job to the same standard for about 120,000 if we'd used volunteer labour. Bear in mind that the invoice was 650,000, and we worked out that we could have done that job for about 120,000.
Unbelievable.
If we'd used volunteer labour, and then if we'd paid someone to manage the whole job, it might have come in at sort of 150 odd thousand. But even if we hadn't used any volunteer labour, we probably could have done it for under 200,000, like perhaps 180,000 without volunteer labour. Obviously, it's in New Zealand dollars I'm talking about, so that probably equates to about 600,000 in Aussie and maybe Canadian dollars, but somewhere around half that in greenbacks and pounds, I don't know.
Let's reiterate to the listeners, the bill from Unispace was over 650K, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, there was that sort of rebate, if you like, which was a personal thing. It wasn't a Unispace thing. It was an implicit arrangement that Unispace Auckland's directors would make donations to the school. But I'll cover that.
We'll cover that after.
In a minute. Yeah. So, and then somewhere along the way, I found out that the other two pilot projects in New South Wales, they'd cost about the same in Aussie dollars, so they're about 650 odd thousand Australian, and apparently there hadn't been a murmur over there. Well, I think it was actually in that note from Mark McKenzie when he to our trust telling us to go ahead. He said that there was a project in Darks Forest that cost about the same. So I was getting pretty wild by this stage, and so I talked to a couple of local brothers. I couldn't talk to Greg or Neville, so the next sort of tear down and the leadership structure in Auckland, there was Peter Bishop, who has a very large construction company. Like construction is his, it's in his blood. And he was a rising star in the Auckland leadership. And then Brian Johnston was another one. He's a little bit older than me and lives quite close, but he's also responsible. He's got a successful business and very good at marketing and general business advice. A lot of people ask him for advice and so on. Anyway, they were both pretty shocked by what I told them. And Brian suggested that I ask Neville for a face-to-face meeting to lay out my concerns, get him to explain what was going on. Neville had just got back from the States a week or so before. This was somewhere around mid-March. So I phoned him just to ask if he'd agree to a meeting. And he just got really, really angry with me. And he said, it's none of my business what margins Unispace makes. And he threatened to put a stop to the job, and finally he just hung up on me. Then over the next few days, there was obviously something was going on behind the scenes. I could sort of just sense it. I had this sense that there was a guillotine swinging over my head or something. David Heath, that's one of the trustees from Pukekohe, he was fairly high up in the globally as well, and he phoned me up and he sort of got stuck into me for interfering in the project. Still wasn't finished by the middle of March. In early April, we used to have a trust meeting at the start of every month, and so in the April trust meeting, we used to have it first thing in the morning, like 6:30 or something. We had dealt with the usual business of the trust, and then Neville stood up and he started just absolutely getting stuck into me, just absolutely shredded me. He was so livid he could hardly even control himself, and he was accused me of all sorts of things. This is in front of a room full of there's about 15. There's 11 trustees, but then there was the sort of management team and the CEOs and various others, and the secretary. There would have been at least 15 people in the room, I think. And he used Mr. Hales' name, and he was basically saying I was opposed to Mr. Hales and to the position, to the local brethren. I've been disloyal to the trust, and then he had a plane to catch, and so after saying his piece, he got up and left. And as soon as he'd gone, Greg Mason stood up, and he carried on where Neville had left off. He'd been primed up beforehand, and both Greg and Neville, they can be absolutely brutal in their if they want to take somebody down, and they both really excelled themselves in their brutality that morning. At one point, Greg he said Mr. Hales knows all about this, and he's very angry. I mean, all the trustees remember him saying that, which is important. I'll just refer to that a little bit later on. But none of this was actually I wasn't singled out for all of this. It was put out as being general, aimed at all the trustees. But because everyone knew that it was all directed at me, but all the other trustees were sitting there just shaking in their seats, because several of them told me later that they'd never ever witnessed a brutal takedown like that morning. It was intended just to strike so much fear into every trustee that not one would ever dare to raise a question about it or anything that with any connection with Bruce ever again. I was just so shattered after that I hardly ate for a week. Literally, I just couldn't get food down. I didn't go out to any meetings for about a week. Up until that point, I regarded Bruce Hales as essentially a godly man, even though there was stuff that was I couldn't work out how it fitted into Christianity. But this man, whose judgment I respected, he was very, very angry with me, and it shook me right to my foundations. From that point on, I knew I hadn't really done anything wrong. All I'd done was I was trying to stand up for the brethren who I represented as a trustee. I was representing and acting on behalf of the community, and here was this man who I respected, just very angry with me for doing that, So from that point on, I realised that he was, he wasn't what he claimed to be. Basically, I realised that he wasn't even a man of God at all. I was pretty hacked off, of course, too, that not one other trustee, not even Maurice Clist, who he would have been in his 70s by then, and he was a good, solid brother. He had mana. Mana in New Zealand is like, it's a word for respect and and gravitas or something or other. Maurice was a successful businessman, and he couldn't be pushed around, but he never stood up or said anything at the time. Actually, to be fair to him, he was the only one. He came round, I think later that same day, he came round to my work, came up to see me, and he just tried to comfort me and just reassure me. And he was the only one of the trustees that did that at the time. So I really did appreciate that, actually.
I mean, Steve, we understand exactly what you're saying, but for people who've never been in the Plymouth Brethren and people who maybe think they're like any other church, should perhaps kind of emphasize the terror and the fear that goes when the name of Bruce Hales is invoked. Because if you're deemed to be up against Bruce Hales, you're on the very verge of falling over the cliff, being shunned, withdrawn from, losing your family, losing everything. It's a huge... This wasn't like a business criticism. This was a spiritual criticism of you and the other trustees. And in reality, criticizing Bruce Hales would be deemed far more serious than even blasphemy inside the church. Belief in Bruce Hales, that he is the man of God, that he's in direct communication with Christ, that he's infallible, is absolutely central to the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. And so the thought that Bruce Hales is angry with you just strikes terror and dismay into the heart of any person who is a true believer in that system. And, I can fully relate to your experience of being so shattered that you couldn't eat or you could barely function, because we've all experienced that at the point where, the guillotine comes down and you're deemed to be a traitor, not to God, but to the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church leadership.
That's exactly right. Yeah. The terror, it's indescribable. It's a deep, deep terror that it's really, really strikes into your heart.
And I mean, it's trained into you from birth that the man of God is sacred. I mean, as a child growing up, if I misbehaved, my mother wouldn't say, well, what would Jesus do? My mother would say, well, what would Mr. Symington think of that? So this name was used like the name of God to bring you into compliance.
Yep, that's exactly right. Yeah.
And then you have there's such good Christians inside there, right? You're talking about Maurice Clist, who here is your average, great, down to earth Christian who just gets overridden by the fear of Bruce Hales in him. And that's the part that just breaks your heart, right? When you know there's such good people in there that are just overridden by fear of the man of God, instead of being able to stand up and be a humble Christian that they know that they are.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's definitely true. Anyway, to get back to the story, where so the project was basically completed sort of early April or thereabouts, and we were supposed to have been making progress payments all along the way, but we hadn't. And we got to April, and of course the trust didn't have any money. No money. So what happens? Well, Morris Clist and I, and we were the only two trustees that had held out against the project. None of the other trustees were in a position to loan money for paying to the trust for paying bills or anything else. Apparently, you know, Neville and Greg, they weren't going to be lending money to the trust. So Morris Clist and I, we loaned the money interest-free to the trust to pay for this learning centre project done by Unispace at exorbitant margins. And by the time we'd paid for the whole, settled the Unispace invoice, we'd probably, between us, we'd put a loan probably close to $500,000 to the trust interest-free. And, you know, not one of the trustees that had been clamouring for the job to go ahead back in February, they weren't able, you know, to put any money in to pay for the project. After the learning centre had been finally completed, I think it was sort of mid-April or thereabouts. So we had an opening celebration in the learning centre. I think it was on a Monday night after the prayer meeting, and all the parents of the senior students were invited, and the trustees and anyone involved with the school, and one or two guys even from Sydney came over that were involved in the global system. And I'm not sure who arranged it, but there was like Shivers Regal alcohol, and you know, and there was top shelf whiskey and stuff, and all sorts of fancy food. Somebody had gone out, and apparently they'd spent about $4,500, I think, on food and drink for this evening.
Wow!
And so everybody came, and a few of the bigwigs talked about, you know, what a fantastic job Unispace had done with the learning centre, how brilliant it was and great the design and so on. And it was good. It was a nice environment. And they played a promotional video, which they'd obviously got made to ensure that Unispace got the jobs at other campuses around the world. And the whole evening was just a dirty big Unispace promotion. A few days afterwards, the trust was asked to refund whoever had purchased the food and drink for the evening. I think it was $4,500 or something or other. The trust had to pay that, even though it was just like a blatant Unispace promo. That was like a final kick in the teeth. And then,
so, is your impression that you said this is a pilot project? Do you get your impression this was kind of the show home for all the other campuses, so they could use that to promote, you know, basically repeating the scheme all around the globe?
Yeah, it would have been a show home. There would have been that element to it. Also, it was just they wanted to iron out any problems that might have come up, I guess, see what went wrong, see what went right, what needed improving, and so on. And then I think these first three pilot projects, they probably would have been used for 6 months or so, or several months anyway, just to sort of let it settle down. But yes, there would have been the element of, this is Auckland's thing, it costs $650,000. You know, this is Dark's Forest, it costs $650,000, whatever. You know, it's setting the scene for what was going to be charged.
Yeah, setting the price
elsewhere around the world. Yeah. Interesting. I don't know. A few months after the project was finished, we had a fundraising day at the school to help pay for it. And the Simmons boys, I don't know if it was one of them or all of them, I can't remember now, but they made a pledge, if you like, of $100,000. And of course everybody thinks, those boys are so generous.
So this is publicly in front of the whole congregation.
Yeah. And no, there was never.
They're going to donate this. Yeah.
They were nobody
without saying they'd actually taken it out of the school's pocket in the first place.
Exactly.
And they eventually donated the other 200,000. I think it was about 18 months, or even may have been 2 years afterwards, that before the final amount was donated, and we had to kind of harass them a bit to get it. And I think it was given at Fund Day, so it looked as though it was, them being generous. And Morris, Clist and I, we didn't get our money back for the best part of 2 years. I think we may have got a little bit of it back before then, but we didn't get final payouts for about 2 years. And then, even then, it was only able to be repaid because the trust sold a block of land. I think probably both of us would have lost at least $20,000 in interest over that period by lending the money to the school, which was just financing a scam.
Yeah.
Nobody's, and I don't. That's part of being a trustee, I guess. You just do what you got to do. I'm not moaning about that, but it's just it kind of, it's one more.
Yeah. I mean, I was a school trustee in the Regina campus in Canada, of course, long before this. But yeah, if you're a trustee, you seem to end up paying a lot of the bills for some reason. So I understand the process.
I hope everybody's sort of understanding. We're actually still only about halfway through the story.
Keep going. Keep going.
So I think it was May or June. So not long after our learning centre was finished, Bruce Hales went over to the UK, and there was a couple of big education strategy meetings, and he was present at. But there was trustees from all over the world that were there. It was kind of intended to provide global direction, and so everybody was working to the same end. And of course, the learning centre directive or direction or whatever you like to call it was one of the main things that came up.
Yeah, so this is self-directed learning. I mean,
self-directed learning.
If you go on OneSchool Global website and their recruitment advertisements, it's all over self-directed learning. It's their kind of hallmark.
And of course the learning centre is the core of the self-directed learning.
Yeah, that's the means to the end. Yeah.
So, and anyway, at this meeting, Bruce, he clearly, unequivocally stated that learning centres at every campus all over the world, they were to be done exclusively by Unispace.
Oh, wow.
No question.
Wow. Where Unispace is owned by two of his sons.
Yep.
No conflict of interest.
And so here he is. Here's the leader of the church ordering his followers worldwide to award his company or his son's company millions of dollars worth of projects at grossly inflated prices. And then he went back to the UK a couple of months after that again. I'm not sure why, but there was another big education meeting over there that time too. And one or two of the senior trustees from our campus were there. Can't recall exactly who. I think David Heath from Pukekohe was one of them. But whoever it was gave our trust a bit of an overview of what had happened when they got back. And I clearly remember the trust being told about some brothers in the UK who'd had the utter temerity to get competitive prices from other companies other than Unispace for their learning centres. Bear in mind that Unispace's prices were, very high, and would have been pretty easy to get prices cheaper. And probably a lot of these trusts were financially straitened, and these brothers had they'd looked at the price given by Unispace for a learning centre, and they thought, that seems pretty high. I'll just do what I should do and get a competitive price from someone else. Anyway, whoever it was, the senior trustee that was telling our trust about it, he said it had come up at Mr. Hales' second visit to the UK, and he said the brothers who did that could count themselves very fortunate to be still in fellowship.
Wow.
So in other words, in other words, they were threatened with excommunication.
Excommunication for being so wicked, so what's the word? Like so devoid of all moral principles and everything else, as to get another alternative price for a project for the community which they were serving, that not even fit for Christian fellowship.
Wow.
And I gather that they, no doubt, they went through the same feelings, if you like, as I had after my smiting. But they probably put their tail between their legs and slunk back into their little holes, and nothing immoral, nothing unrighteous, but they'd basically been dangled over the precipice of excommunication just for doing that.
I think to just really reiterate that here is someone who claims to be the man of God, right? Direct conversations with God, the Lord, whoever he claims it to be, but yet is using his authority to make sure that his sons make this extra money. Like, let's just literally, everybody that is inside there that is still listening to this at this point in time on this podcast, I want you to sit with that.
Exactly.
Man of God. I mean, from anything that I understand of Jesus' story, right? And I mean, I walk with big crutches with that. But my understanding would be that we're here to help people. We are here to make things easier. We are not here to make the most money possible. Money in the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church has replaced faith in Christianity. And this is the prime example of where this has been replaced. So if you truly want to stay and be a Christian, I suggest that you exit out of the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church and find yourself a church that honors and gives credit to answering to God and Jesus, not to a man.
Absolutely. Yep.
Not wanting to have a reading here, but there's a scripture that speaks about by his poverty we are enriched, speaking of Jesus. Well, in this case, you could say that in the case of Bruce Hales, by his enrichment, we're impoverished.
Exactly. That is witnessed to, because that I actually I spoke to one or two of the other trustees later and reminded them of that, and they recalled it clearly. Is that in the minutes of the meeting? I assume that there were minutes taken of both those meetings that Bruce Hales was at in the UK. There would have been minutes taken, but was that in the minutes, or was it never put in the minutes, or was it scrubbed from them afterwards? I've got no idea, but it could be. There'd be a lot of brethren in the UK that were or from all over the world that were at those meetings that would have heard Bruce say that. Firstly, that the jobs were to be done exclusively by Unispace, and secondly, that the way that those brothers were so shredded for getting alternative pricing.
What you think? Like back when I was in there, right? Like what happened to the practices of community coming together and getting a job done? Like it's just, to me, it just doesn't make sense that this would have, why would it, if it could have been done at a much lower price, why wouldn't have that happened? To me, that's what they try and hold their whole foundation on, is that it's this community that's there to help and give compassion and care to everybody and everything. Back in the 90s when I was in there, like that would have been a community that would have come together. It would have been built together. It would have, all that blood, sweat, and tears would have been put in by the community itself to come together and not only save costs, but build that community feeling that they base themselves on.
Yep, like a barn raising in the Amish community.
Yeah.
The whole community comes together, and lo and behold, the barn goes up in a day or something or other. And yeah. About a year after all this had happened, a directive went out from Sydney that all the older trustees with experience and financial substance, they had to get off the school trusts and be replaced with younger trustees. So it was a little bit baffling at first, but the reason for it became pretty clear to me that the older trustees with experience, they were going to get in the way of this sort of thing. So he wanted younger trustees on who would do his bidding, if you like.
Yeah, more easily manipulated.
Yep. So all the older trustees on the Auckland Trust, except for Morris, Plist and me, they all resigned, including Neville and Greg. A couple of younger ones remained on, and then a couple of other younger ones were put on. Morris and I were put under a huge amount of pressure to get off, but we both refused to resign. I refused to resign because I was the finance trustee, and at that stage I was paying all the staff wages. I was doing all the tax returns, the GST returns. You know, there was an enormous amount of work that I was still doing as the finance trustee, and there's no way that I could have just resigned. The place would have descended into chaos. No GST returns would have got presented. The staff wouldn't have got paid. None of the new trustees knew anything about it. So I just said, look, I'll resign when there's systems in place to make the school keep running. Morris wouldn't resign because he still had money. I forget the reason, but I think it was partly because he still had money loaned to the school at that point. But they were so desperate to get rid of us that Greg Mason even made a public announcement at a fundraising day that we'd both resigned, and he sort of thanked us both for our service and gave us gift baskets. We got called up to the stage and so on, and this is like we hadn't resigned. We had refused to resign. We weren't resigning, but they'd made a public announcement that we had resigned. So
they had your obituary and your funeral, but you were actually still there.
Yeah, we were sort of being buried alive. And we knocked on the coffin lid and said, "Hey, let me out." I'm not dead yet.
So it would seem.
Anyway, so then 3 months after that, the next directive came out from Sydney. This time it was about the junior schools. Up until that time, there'd been, J1, J2, or whatever they are. I don't know, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, and separate classrooms with a teacher for each classroom. Anyway, the new thinking was that if we had, similar to the learning centre kind of thing, a big room and teachers could share the responsibility and they could devote more time to children that needed additional help and so on, and that the brighter ones could work at their own pace and so on. So anyway, so there was this plan that in our older block, which had four separate classrooms and a hall, that the walls would get knocked out between the four classrooms and it would be made into a fancy, like a junior learning centre type arrangement.
Open plan schoolroom.
Open plan and sort of bright colours and different sort of pods and different areas that kids could go to learn according to their style and so on. And of course, no prizes for guessing who was going to do the work. So the trustees of the Auckland campus, who now there was probably may have been 5, I think, probably younger ones, plus me and Morris. Hardly any of them had much in the way of business experience. Some had no equity at all, like zero equity. Mortgages, they all had mortgages. They all obviously enthusiastically took this up. It was another pearl of wisdom from Bruce himself. And this time around, Unispace said they needed $35,000 or thereabouts just to provide the quote.
What?
Yeah. So this is not, all you get for paying this $35,000 is a quote.
I'll give you a quote for half that, Steve.
Apparently that was in line with the normal sort of corporate practice those days. So that got rammed through, and money was paid to Unispace for the quote. And the quote came back just under $1 million to take 3 walls out between 4 classrooms and
wow,
pretty it up a little bit. And then there was some secondary work in the yard and so on to be done later on, and the total price was about 1.3 million. We'd built the whole junior school a few years before for somewhere around half a million thereabouts, I think, maybe in 600,000, I don't know. The quote came in just right at the end of October, a couple of days before the end of October, I think, along with a message that they needed the go ahead within about a week. They needed the trust to give them the go ahead about a week later, so that they could get everything in place, ready to do the job again over the Christmas period, have it ready for the start of the next school year. So, here's a quote: $1 million in the first stage, $1.3 million for the whole project. You need to reply within a week,
wow.
Get it happening. And of course, all the trustees, okay, well, we'll just better come from Mr. Bruce, we'll just go ahead with it. Actually, even Morris, he was sort of willing to go ahead with it, but I just said, no way, I just will not agree. I said, the trust has got absolutely no money to pay for that, no money. Who's going to who's going to underwrite this project? Who's going to put money up? Even if we did have a fund day and raise the money, who's going to pay for it in the meantime? Because the younger trustees, if we build it, the Brennan will, step up and pay for it and whatever. So
the law will provide.
So I said, look, I cannot agree with this, but if you want to go ahead, I suggest that 2 or 3 of you trustees go around in any all the previous fund days that we'd had. There was about 90% of what we raised, or 85% of what we raised, came from about 15 householders. Like there was, most of the brethren would give, 85% of the brethren would give about 15% of the total that was given, and the other 15% would give the 85% of the total. Follow?
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, so there's about 15 brethren that are, that we could count on to basically to fund most of these projects. Why don't you go around, tell them what's in mind, tell them it's come from Mr. Hales, that Unispace is going to do the job, that's going to cost $1 million or 1.3 million all up, and see if anyone's prepared to give or lend money to underwrite it, until there's been a fund day to pay for it or whatever. So they did. They did that. 2 or 3 of the trustees went around to the wealthy brethren, told them what was going on, and asked if there was any money available, and not one of them had any money to spare at the moment. They were building a new building, or they were building a house, or that big tax bill, or that whatever. There's love to be able to help, but not really in a position to do anything at the moment. I'm sorry. And so they reported back, of course, and whoops, well, there's no money. So that was a bit of a dilemma. So we went back to Unispace and said, look, sorry, but we just literally haven't got the money to do this project. And then one of the trustees, called Peter McIntyre, he basically did all the donkey work around the school, and he maintained the yard and all that, kept it all looking really, really nice. He was brilliant at caring for the property. And over the Christmas period, he and a couple of others, they got stuck in, just pulled the walls out and painted it, put carpet down, and got some furniture and whatever. And we got an area that was basically in line with Mr. Hales's vision, which we'd done ourselves with volunteer labour, and the total cost was $35,000. which was
I'm really bad at maths, Steve. What's the ratio of what it actually cost to what Unispace was going to charge?
Well, it's about 1/30th. It's about, they were going to charge about 30 times as much, but we paid Unispace $35,000 for a quote, and then we did the job for about the same price as we paid Unispace for the quote.
But you never got a refund on the quote?
No, of course not.
So just it would be funny if it hadn't actually happened, wouldn't it? I mean,
this is brethren's money. This is, as Cheryl was saying, this is this is all the sisters doing baking. Anyway, I'm trying to keep myself from
It's hard though, because we have family in there. We all have family in there. And for me, that's what makes it personal. That's what makes me emotional, is that my heart breaks for all those women in there that have no clue. They sincerely, like my mom, this is back when I used to talk to her, she would have sincerely believed that all that money that she was like, it was the highlight of her day was to be able to provide for the children going to school.
Yep.
And I think that's what breaks my heart and makes me so emotional about it, which I think every single one of us should get emotional about it, because that's where the change comes, is that it's just heart-wrenching. It's heart-wrenching to know that they are using their members to line their own pockets, and these members don't know.
Yep. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
There's a lot more I could bring forward too. Like in my role as trustee, there was towards the end there was just so much waste, extravagant spending, and so on. But I could go on for hours. But I'm just going to focus on this one thing at the moment. But the other thing to remember, it wasn't only the actual campuses that Unispace did fit outs for. There were a lot of other Brethren entities, like Brethren owned or entities, such as the UBT offices and the national school office, which was like not a campus. It's where the whole New Zealand school system was run from. They had their own staff and so on. But at the campuses, there was at least a local trust which had to be persuaded or coerced or threatened or whatever to give the contract to Unispace. But in all of these other entities, the decision makers at the top of UBT, for example, or UBT accountants or whatever, they're the same people as at the top of Unispace. Like they're all it's all part of the same circle. So if UBT decides they want a new fit out and they give the thing to Unispace, well, there's just nobody to say, well, hang on, don't you think that price is a bit steep? We could get that a bit cheaper by doing this or whatever. But the brethren, of course, are giving to Unispace all the time through their computer rentals and phone rentals and whatever else there is. To
UBT, you mean? Yeah.
To UBT, and then UBT is giving it to Unispace, and it's all just in the same big circle.
Yes. Yeah.
For in New Zealand, the Westmount National Office had a whole floor in Peter Bishop's big glass edifice in Auckland, and while the building was being built, Peter Bishop's team, they were partway through fitting out the level for the national school.
The Brethren school, OneSchool Global, in effect.
Yeah. But the national, this is the national headquarters, if you like. It's the umbrella organisation over all the actual campuses. Right. And it was the fit out that they were doing was just a standard commercial grade fit out. Nothing wrong with it. Neville Simmons walked in one day unannounced and he just said, rip it all out. No, not having that. No, sorry, rip that out. And there's nothing wrong with it, nothing shoddy about it. It just Unispace was going to do the fit out, not just an ordinary commercial grade fit out. It was going to be a Unispace fit out. Thank you. And the foreman, who was a Brethren man, probably late 30s or about 40, I don't know. He was just spitting tax because not only at the incredible waste of Brethren's money, but the arrogance of the way Neville, he just came in and just said, nah, pull that out. Like, this is just, I think this is shocking stuff. I think any reasonable-minded person should stop and think, well, how does this equate with spirituality or Christianity or even just normal decency? As far as I'm concerned, it's not spirituality, it's just avarice, it's just shameless love of money, lust for power. As we know, as Cheryl was just saying, that like, it's just a non-stop pulling at the heartstrings of the community all the time by the continual references to providing for the potential and and the wisdom of John Hales and setting on this deliverance from the world and so on.
And they'll get the school children out on stage in little choirs singing songs.
Yep.
And they'll get children to stand up at the podium and ask everyone to give money. And everyone feels that the money they're giving is benefiting the children.
Of course.
Well, actually, a very large proportion of it is siphoned directly off into the pockets of the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church leadership. Wow.
Yeah. So my wife has blamed my son Braden many times that he influenced me away from believing in Bruce's infallibility and the rightness of the Brethren position. I mean, she's sort of blamed me for believing Braden and so on, but I've told her every time it was nothing to do with Braden. This massive fraud scheme back in, starting in 2014 and carrying on for the next few years, it just made me realise that Bruce he's nothing but just a con man. He's intelligent, he's capable, he's smart, but he's just bankrupt. I've got no hesitation in saying that. I've got no evidence. I've seen no evidence that he's anything other than morally bankrupt. My life changed from the time Neville and Greg gave me that verbal thrashing in the trust meeting. Like, for a year or two, I ignored them. I was just cold and aloof whenever they were there. If they ever spoke to me, I just, and Greg kind of realised that he'd been pretty rough. And I actually like Greg. He can say sorry, and he did. He came and sort of made a bit of a half-baked apology to me. Wasn't really an apology, but it was a sort of one. But I could tell he was in a bit of a bind because I'm sure he actually felt bad about the way he'd spoken to me. But how could he apologise? He'd only been passing on what Bruce Hales had told him to pass on. And his loyalty to Bruce came first, and his conscience came second. So we're about 2/3 of the way through the story, so there's still more to come.
Keep going.
So fast forward to early 2018. One night after a meeting, Brian Johnson came up and told me that he and Peter Bishop had been told to look into the whole Learning Centre Unispace matter and report back to Bruce. And so that came as quite a big bombshell to me. I never expected it would ever, I'd long since sort of given up expecting it would ever get looked into. So they asked me to write up a one-page report on it. I said, look, I doubt if I could fit it on a page, but I had a go, and I got the most important details down, ended up almost 2 pages, but it was only skimming over the main points. But I included in that report that I'd completely lost my faith in Bruce Hales from that point on, even though I knew that it was a report going to him, So So I think Peter and Brian, they spent quite a while on it. They spoke to other trustees in Auckland and around the country and so on. Probably most of the campuses in New Zealand had got Unispace learning centres by then. And they also spoke to Neville, and Brian told me that he'd been very uncooperative and arrogant. So there was a bit of a review, which I wasn't any part of. I don't know went on. But the upshot of it was that Neville was thrown under the bus. He was the public fall guy for the whole thing. It was made to look as though it was all him. He got taken off. He'd been on trusts all over the place, probably 20 different trusts, and he got taken off them all. He moved back from the front row to the third row. He suddenly and he went around with a bit of a sad face for a bit. And
I wanted to stop here so that I can explain to the viewers and listeners what that comment that you just said was, because there's many people who've talked about this on podcasts, TikToks, little short videos. Steve just mentioned that Neville was moved from the front row to the third row. So for anybody who doesn't understand that, in the meeting, when we go to church, and all the men sit in the front row, in the first few rows. And so you're placed on the first, second, third, fourth row, according to your hierarchy. So when he's referenced to Neville going from the front row to the third row, would have shown everybody in that locality how he was being demoted. So he was being put on timeout. It would have been a clear stance that they would have made to everybody else in that city, town, wherever he was at, that this man is no longer regarded as front row material, hands straight to Bruce Hales. He's being taken away from that position. Just so everybody understands that. We many of us who are on TikTok, we get these questions, right? And so this is a prime example of what happens when you get used as a scapegoat or get involved in something that eventually Bruce Hales needs somebody to make a point that this has been taken care of. It will happen within the front rows and in the rows of the brothers that are inside the meeting. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. I just need to clarify that.
Neville, he made a bit of a public acknowledgement in Auckland a few months later. He didn't say anything at the time publicly. He just moved back and put on a bit of a Undertaker's face and so on, and he finally made a public acknowledgement, but there was not a single mention or reference to scamming the brethren or anything. All he acknowledged was that he'd put his judgment over some matters up against Bruce's. He'd told some people his own opinion instead of Bruce Hales's opinion, so that was made to look as publicly that was what it was. Neville he had to repay some money to part of the resolution of this matter was that Neville repaid some of the campuses some of the money that had been ripped off. And Peter Bishop told me actually that Bruce himself had suggested the amount that Neville should repay to the campuses. I think to Peter and Brian, he'd said, do you think this much would be fair? I don't know what the amount was, but I gathered that they both sort of gulped a bit. They both thought it should have been like 2 or 3 times as much, and Peter just mumbled something like, whatever you suggest, Mr. Hales, and so that was what he paid. So Neville's never apologised to me or to the brethren for what I believe is avaricious and despicable behaviour. He's actually met with me 3 times, each time supposedly to sort of apologise to me. But each time, all he did was explain his position. He never said sorry. Each time I said to him, do you realise that at that trust meeting, what you said destroyed my faith in Bruce, actually destroyed my faith in the testimony? I said I couldn't eat for about a week. It really hit me hard. But even then, he just could not say, I'm sorry, Steve.
Wow.
He can't, Neville can't say I'm sorry. Greg can. After this came up, all the other trustees all of a sudden got brave, and and they all came, and people were coming up to me after the meeting and calling around to my home and, in tears almost about the way that they hadn't supported me at the time and whatever. They were all, kind of ashamed, but I accepted their apologies. But I found out a little while later that I'd wondered why this matter had suddenly needed to be reviewed. Suddenly I found out the reason why, and it was that I think the reason why is that Michael Powell, that accountant in Hamilton that referred to that come up and given advice to the trust, he'd apparently written to Bruce and he'd set out a whole lot of concerns that he'd had, including financial concerns, probably as to some of this sort of stuff included. His own accountancy firm had been taken over by UBT and it had become UBT Accountants, but he still worked there at the time, I think, and he was aware of quite a bit of dodgy stuff going on in the various Brethren entities. And so he'd written to Bruce, and I think he might have, I'm not sure, he may have said something in his letter that that he felt that as an accountant, he had an obligation to go to the authorities over some of this stuff, you know. I may be wrong there. So all of a sudden, of course, there was this threat that you know, that he'd go to the authorities and that it would all get looked into, and so there'd been a flurry of activity to try and, you know, make it look as though it had been cleaned up and so on. But in the meantime, Mike Powell had been given a legal document, like UBT, or someone, I think it was UBT, engaged lawyers, and they drew up a legal document for Mike to sign, and he had to withdraw everything he had written in his letter to Bruce, and he may have even had to deny it was true. And part of the document was that he would pledge to never breathe a word of it to, you know, he would be bound to confidentiality for the rest of his life.
And let's just reiterate that Mike is an accountant he's inside the Brethren. He's not what we would consider a worldly accountant. This is an accountant within the Brethren.
Yep. Yeah. Yes. He just didn't feel that he he didn't feel that he could sign that. I may have some of this detail incorrect, but this is the gist of it. He was threatened with excommunication if he didn't sign it. He's a very social guy. He enjoys the social life, enjoys his family and his friends, and you know, so on. And he figured the price was just too high, and so he signed it. But it had come right down to the wire. The Brethren in Hamilton had actually come together on a Friday night in the main hall to excommunicate him. This is how it's done in the Brethren. You have a meeting with the whole congregation present in the main hall, and the matters brought forward that we can, you know, this person is guilty of this, that, and the other thing, and we can no longer walk in fellowship with this person. So they'd come together specifically for the purpose of excommunicating Michael Powell for not signing this document. They waited for ages and ages, but the priests the persons who were handling his matters, they were waiting for them to come, and they never turned up. And finally a message came that Mike had submitted, and so the Brethren went home, you know, and he had escaped the death penalty by, you know, he'd come within a whisker of being, you know, dropped over the precipice, you know, for not signing this thing. So he did sign it. So that, you know, and as far as I know, he's abided by what he said. You know, none of what I'm saying now, he hasn't gone against what he said he'd do, as far as I know.
So he's gagged. He's gagged for life on the subject, legally gagged.
Anyway, yeah, he's gagged. Yeah. So after my son Braden was withdrawn from in 2019, I was pretty unhappy about that whole about Braden being withdrawn from, and I started raising my concerns about various things that Bruce was implicated in, including the whole Unispace saga, which in my mind it was still outstanding. And obviously that all got relayed back to Bruce, and he desperately didn't want any of this stuff to come out into the light. And Peter and Brian told me that he denied having anything to do with the learning centres or knowing anything about them. Peter told me, you know, Bruce says he had absolutely nothing to do with the learning centres. He left it to his boys. And I said, but, you know, he said this, and Peter said, so what are you calling Bruce Hales a liar? Well, it's not true. I don't know. I'm not saying he's a liar, but what he's saying is not true. And of course, that made Bruce very angry when I wouldn't accept his assurances that he had nothing to do with it. Same with I raised several pretty damning matters, including the way that you'd been treated, Richard. That whole thing. I raised that, and they said, look, they made inquiry of the Brethren. And where were you from?
Cambridge.
Yeah, they'd made inquiries there, and that you had been rightly, there was no question that the withdrawal was totally justified and so on. So that, I was just shut down for all that. But anyway, they obviously didn't want any of this to come out. So there were three brothers in Auckland that were serving me, if you like. There's Peter Bishop and Brian Johnston and another older man called Robin Suckling. And initially they started a bit gently. They were sort of trying to persuade me that, everything was actually all right. There were reasons for it and explanations and whatever. But I just wouldn't accept what they were saying because it didn't line up with the facts. Their attitude got increasingly threatening. And then about a week before I was shut up, I was called to a meeting in Peter Bishop's glass building there that we saw before. And basically they called me there and issued me with an ultimatum. Either I accepted it, Bruce had done nothing wrong, or I'd be shut up. And
wow.
Yeah, so I didn't accept it, and so I got shut up. So, and one of the things that I kept raising was the way that Greg Mason had said in that trust meeting, Mr. Hales, he'd used Mr. Hales' name. He said, Mr. Hales knows all about this. He's very angry. And, I said that proves that what Bruce says, that he didn't know anything about it, isn't the truth, And anyway, so they got Greg along to try and resolve this in my mind, if you like. And he apologized. He took very, very low ground. Like, he was crawling on broken glass on his belly, basically. He couldn't get any lower. His whole attitude and everything, he just felt so smitten. And he claimed he had no recollection of ever saying it, no reason, no idea why he would have said it. I was just gobsmacked. Like in 2014, he was one of the top 2 or 3 leading brothers in the whole of New Zealand, and he was in Sydney all the time, spoke to Mr. Hales on the phone every week at least, and he would have been sort of late 40s probably, maybe pushing towards 50, I don't know, but he's a responsible brother with his own business and everything else. And somehow they're expecting me to believe that a mature, responsible man in the confidence of Bruce Hales had a lot to do with Bruce Hales, that he'd stood there in this trust meeting, he'd made up a story about Bruce Hales being very angry just because, whatever, and he'd yelled it out in front of a whole room full of other mature persons. Now he couldn't even explain why he said it, or had no recollection of saying it, or
Yeah,
anyway,
the whole plan with that all was, right, is like, they just don't like it, nothing can get pinned back on Bruce. So he's got his minions out on the front to be able to change the narrative, whatever way they need to change it to keep him, away from it all. Yeah.
He's squeaky clean. Other people have to take the fall all the time.
Yeah.
So obviously I want to make it quite clear in all of this. I've got no issue with schools being pleasant places for their kids. No problem with any of that. And I don't mind businesses making a good profit. Someone can make $100 million ethically and righteously. Well, good on them. That doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I'm not against anyone making money. I'm not against the schools being pleasant places. What I am taking issue with here is the way that Bruce and other people in his sphere, they used his supposed infallibility and his authority over the Brethren and the continual appeal to provide the best for the oncoming generation. They used that to enrich themselves.
Yeah.
And as you've said, Cheryl, the Brethren responded to these things. They rallied, provided the learning centres, they provided the money to build these learning centres and so on. And so much of the money is just gone back to these wealthy people.
I mean, is it fair to say this is classic money laundering, whereby the money is given for a charity, and of course that means the government's chipping in 30%, and in addition to that, the government in many countries is also heavily subsidising the schools. So there's a whole contingent of government money going into OneSchool Global, and then Bruce Hales has got this kind of golden tap on the side, which he opens wide. And so a lot of the money that goes into their charitable funds is actually coming straight out, laundered through. I mean, I call it a twin tub washing machine. Like your OneSchool Global is the first tub, Unispace is the second tub, and then all the cash comes out squeaky clean straight into Bruce Hales's pocket.
Okay, that's an interesting thought. Yeah. It's probably a three tub because most of it initially goes into UBT and then into the school and then into Unispace. But anyway.
I mean, actually, we should mention there, because a lot of viewers may not know what UBT is. UBT is the financial wing of the church. It's owned by the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church, and it manages all their finances and has fingers in all the Brethren businesses as a consultant and a provider of IT equipment, computers, phones. It's a huge global business affiliated or owned by the church.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Money Laundering 101. The type of money laundering used by OneSchool Global Unispace is called TBML, Trade-Based Money Laundering. The Canadian government gives this definition. Trade-based money laundering is the process of disguising proceeds of crime and other illicit financial flows as legitimate trade transactions. In the case of OneSchool Global Unispace, there are two reasons to disguise the origin of the funds. Firstly, the funds have been donated to a charity and therefore include approximately 30% tax refund from the government. Secondly, the donors believe that all their donations are used for children's education. To see how TBML works, we will take a starting figure of $80 million to be laundered from tax-exempt charitable donations into the pockets of the criminals. The first step in any money laundering scheme is to divide up the sum into many smaller transactions, small enough to fly under the radar. OneSchool Global has about 135 campuses, so by splitting the $80 million between them, each campus only has to launder about $600,000. TBML doesn't work for commodities that have a known value. So it is no good selling each campus a school bus for $600,000. The tax inspector would smell a rat. However, building projects are ideal for TBML. There is no way to know from the school trust accounts whether the price charged for a building or redevelopment project is sensible or not. The Self-Directed Learning (SDL) project provided a perfect opportunity to launder a huge sum of money. Every campus would need a large and expensive redevelopment of indeterminate value. But TBML does not work with competitive bidding. A genuine competition for the job would immediately expose the extra sum being laundered through. So Bruce Hales used his spiritual authority to enforce a Unispace monopoly on the SDL projects globally. This having been established, all Unispace had to do was calculate a sensible cost price for the job, add $600,000 and push it through. Anyone who objected was cut into the profits or threatened with excommunication. Repeat the formula 135 times and voila! $80 million has been laundered from tax-exempt charitable funds donated for children right into the pockets of the Unispace directors. Everything is invoiced, the books all balance, and if nobody squeals, they will get away with it. So who was committing a crime in all this? The victims, the ordinary grassroots brethren, were inadvertently defrauding the government by claiming tax relief on donations that are not actually used for charitable purposes. OneSchool Global and its local trusts were defrauding the brethren by not getting competitive tenders and knowingly assisting Unispace in perpetrating a massive financial fraud on both the brethren and the government. The Unispace directors and PBCC leadership cooked up the whole crooked scheme and were the ultimate benefactors, abusing their religious influence and godlike powers of excommunication to both eliminate dissent and to stimulate extraordinary levels of giving from the brethren. What are the red flags for this type of fraud? There are two very distinctive features of TBML that stand out in this case. 1. Conflict of interest. Many of the school trustees were also Unispace directors or had family or business connections to Unispace directors. All the OneSchool Global management was under the direct controlling influence of Bruce Hales, whose sons owned Unispace. 2. A monopoly. TBML can't exist in the face of honest competition. The brazen imposition of a Unispace monopoly was proof that something fraudulent was proceeding. Here is an illustration of the OneSchool Global Unispace play. At the top left you have the ordinary grassroots brethren, the 40,000 or so parents and grandparents who toil to feed the endless appetite of OneSchool Global. To the right of the brethren you have the initiatives, UBT, Campus & Co, Streamlined 3, Trove, Connect, Orbit, One Medifund and so on, all of which suck money and labour from the brethren and feed it into OneSchool Global. Brethren also donate money directly to OneSchool Global through local fun days, bake sales, legacies, etc. So there is a direct arrow from the brethren to OneSchool Global as well as via the initiatives. Below the brethren you have the government, who give an approximately 30% tax rebate and in many countries also directly subsidise the schools. OneSchool Global and Unispace are the two washing machines, and together they comprise the laundry. The OneSchool Global machine sucks in charitable tax-exempt funds from the brethren, passes them on to Unispace via grossly overpriced invoicing, and Unispace delivers the money to Gareth and Charles as an apparently legitimate commercial profit. Gareth, Charles and Daddy Bruce are all smiling. I wonder why. Yeah.
So I am thinking about the Auckland Unispace guys. They're all very, very comfortable. Doesn't begin to describe the kind of lifestyles they live. It's exceedingly comfortable. But I was thinking, like, if it was me in their position, I'd be ashamed to have just ordinary brethren into my home, knowing that where the source of this money had come from. But anyway, that's up to them. I don't. That's just the way I am. I can't do that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So that's sort of a bit of a summary of the Unispace was sold, I think, in 2020 or thereabouts, and no doubt it was sold on the back of a lot of business that had come through this, from the schooling system at high margins. Were the margins higher than they would be on most of their projects? I don't know, but a few questions do come up, and the first question is, how much money did Unispace get from the schools and other entities like UBT and so on around the world? how much would the total be? And obviously, no idea. But could take a bit of an estimate. There's a guy called Dave Mitchinson. I think he must have worked for Unispace, perhaps on a previous employment or something. I don't know. But anyway, he said on his bio on LinkedIn that he coordinated 135 Unispace projects at Brethren campuses around the world. And if you took the average project value, again, who knows, it might be different value in New Zealand and Australia and UK, depending on the currency and various other things. I don't know. But if we took a guess at, like, the Auckland campus cost about 650k in New Zealand dollars, and I gather the two pilot projects in Australia cost a similar amount in Australian dollars. So I think it's probably reasonable. In the UK, what was the value of the projects? Was it £650,000 or was it like £300,000? Who knows? But I think for the purposes of this exercise, if we used a figure of about 650,000 Australian dollars as an average for the value of the projects, well, you multiply that out by 135 projects, and that works out about $100 million worth around the world over that period from 2014 to 2020. But some of the projects were a lot more expensive, and some of the projects, like the national office fit out in Peter Bishop's building, that could have been quite expensive. I've got no idea, but so anyway, so it may have been 100 million to 120 million, somewhere in that sort of broad range. So then the question comes up as to how much profit do they make out of that? Well, again, it's you can't really say. Based on the costings I'd done for the Auckland project, the direct costs would have been approximately 20% of the material costs and so on would have been about 20% of the total invoice value. Wow. And so if you're allowed another 5 or 10% for overheads and labour, it still leaves a gross margin of 70 to 75%.
That's coming from, again, I want to reiterate that money is being taken from all of the free labor of anybody that could have donated. And it's lining these multimillionaire pockets. Could you imagine if they had stepped out on the front lawn and explained it how it went out, right? Nobody would have signed up for it. Right? Yeah, nobody would have signed up for it. So they've got to present it in this narrative. Again, we see this time and time again. And, just on a side note here, when we're talking about OSG and the amount of teachers that have come forward, like, absolutely incredible, the amount of teachers that have stepped up to the plate. Obviously, none of them want to come. It's too hard for them to come on and explain what it is. But even Ben Woodbury has tons of teachers that reach out to him. The amount of stories that they come out with that goes on inside there, as much as I wish that these schools were supporting our next generation of children, they just simply aren't. And it's because of situations that Steve has explained here. This is the foundation that the school system stands on. So what goes on inside these schools Monday to Friday, every day, just simply doesn't give anybody a hope in hell inside here of getting what they need, because it's just such corrupt stuff that it starts with.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a huge irony here, isn't it, in that the whole OneSchool Global system was set up to preserve the children from the corruption and the wickedness of the world. And it's run by people that are corrupt and wicked and are actually using it as a laundry, as a money laundry. Yeah. I mean, OneSchool Global isn't the victim in this story. OneSchool Global is complicit, hand in hand with Unispace, to funnel money from the ordinary grassroots brethren into the Hales administration. Is that fair?
Oh, in my opinion, 100%. Yeah.
If you took the low like, so if the margin was somewhere between 50%, the gross margin somewhere between 50%, could be as high as 70%. If you took the low end of that scale, 50% on a say 100 million of work done, that's means the Unispace directors pocketed somewhere around $50 million. But if you took higher figures, if you took say a 75% gross margin on sales of 120 million, well, that, you know, maybe the GP was as high as 90 million. You know, somewhere in that region, between 50 and 100 million of profit, has gone to the directors of Unispace over a pretty short period of time, which is, you know, not too bad. You know, maybe some brethren think that's reasonable, but I think it's extortion personally. And it's all money, as you say, like it's money that the shepherd has fleeced from his own flock, which he claims to care so much about. They're all already multimillionaire. Kind of reminds me a little bit of that when Nathan was sent to King David, and he told him that parable about the rich man not taking from his own flock to provide a meal for that visitor. He took a lamb from the poor man.
Yes.
David was angry at you know, what he's done is wrong, you know, and he should restore him fourfold or whatever it was. I can't remember. And Nathan said, "Well, you're the man." What my point is, and speaking out in this way, is I want to say to these people like Neville Simmons and Gareth Hales and whoever else, you're the man. You know, David got right. He got convicted and he got right. Well, let's see if you can.
Yeah. Well, fourfold would be pretty good. I think we'd go with fourfold.
Yeah. So, another question that came up is, why did the Simmons boys make a donation back instead of just reducing the price? Well, I've got a few theories about the reason for that, which I'll put forward. I don't know the actual reason, but what I think is that the Unispace directors had possibly with direction from Bruce Hales, I don't know, but they determined that the learning centres should cost about that much. And so all three pilot projects were all similar, as far as I understand, in their price, but in the local currency. But they had to be consistent. Like, there's no point in two projects in Australia being done for 650,000 and one in New Zealand being done for 350,000, because immediately questions will be raised. So they've got to set a precedent for future projects. And in any case, Neville knew that if he'd told our trust that the learning centre would be 650,000, there would have been open rebellion. He would never have got it through. So he knew that. So the only possible way for him to get it through the trust was to offer to do what he did and donate half the money back through their share of the profits. So it's quite likely that Unispace still made a profit, even though 300,000 was given back. I imagine they still made a profit on it. And of course, from Neville and his brother's point of view, it's sort of like an investment in the future, if you like. They're if they can pull this project off, well, then there's going to be a whole lot more coming in. Over time, they'd get well and truly repaid.
When you talk about 135 campuses that Unispace did these projects on, that's all the campuses. I mean, there are only 135 campuses, aren't there, more or less? Yeah.
I don't know if every single campus in the world got... Hamilton, just a little bit south of here, my brother-in-law he was a trustee at the Hamilton campus. But at that campus, they had three of the trustees had their own office fit-out businesses, one in Thames, one in Tauranga, and one in Hamilton. They just quietly did did a little bit of work. So as far as I know, they never got a Unispace learning centre there. They just quietly did it themselves without making a fuss of it.
But essentially, almost every campus globally got a a Unispace learning center. I was looking up online on some of the UK campuses, and one of them actually describes it as a Unispace learning center.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah. Wow. So this was just one play, like you call it the Unispace play, like these big investors talk about a financial play. The Unispace play probably netted between 50 and 100 million for Unispace.
Yeah. Well, that's what it looks like. Yeah. Going back to the making the donations, that because they're a charitable donation, they get a third of it back. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
not quite as, which effectively means that the government, as you were pointing out before, Richard, the government is actually chipping in. The taxpayers, New Zealand taxpayers, are chipping in, helping support the whole scheme. So,
well, I think the government might be quite interested in this video, Steve.
Okay.
certainly in places like Canada and Australia, where the government is also directly subsidizing the schools, they may also want to rethink their generosity. But yeah, I'm sure it can be widely distributed.
Okay.
Oh yeah, we have our means. Yeah.
Initially, I thought that there might have been a bit of a tax avoidance component in doing it that way, but if you look into it carefully, it works out fiscally neutral. So it doesn't seem as though there's any.
That's in terms of the Simmons giving back some of the money,
yeah,
right?
It doesn't seem as though there's any. It's not illegal. There's no avoidance in doing it that way. Yeah, well, and of course in Unispace's books, they would have shown an extra, 100 million or whatever of sales with fantastic margins over that period of time when it was being prepared for sale. And of course, when a business is sold, then all these things are taken into account and working out the
price you can sell
value
it for.
of the business. Yeah. So
I mean, it sounds rather like what they call a pump and dump scheme, whereby you artificially inflate the value of a business and then sell it, and then the new owner suddenly mysteriously finds that all the customers disappeared because they'd been paid off to use that business in the first place. Not suggesting that anything untoward has taken place, of course.
No. Oh no,
it's what it appears to be like.
Yeah, so the question comes up, so even if Unispace did make, tens of millions of dollars profit from the Brethren, did they do anything illegal? Well, I don't know. I can't say that there was anything illegal. I don't know that there was. A lot of pastors in the mega churches in the States, for example, they persuade their congregations to give them. Like some of them are incredibly wealthy, aren't they? They live in unimaginable luxury, and they fly around in private jets and everything else. And that's probably not illegal. If the money's given, not coerced from them, well, it's not illegal. But even if it's not illegal, in my mind, it's still despicable behaviour for anyone who's claiming to represent Christ. To the congregation to act in that way.
From your story, there was an awful lot of coercion happening.
Well, it was
in the interface. Yeah.
And another major difference between the Brethren and these mega church congregations, they can leave if they want to go to another church. They can leave. They don't have to be there. And if they leave, they're not going to be ostracized, condemned, sued, followed by private investigators, and generally, having their lives just destroyed.
Right. It's how they did this. Do you really want to be associated with a mainstream Christian church that is doing this kind of stuff behind your back while everybody's slaving away trying to think that all their baking goods and all their everything that they're doing is going to the school, when really it's not all going to the school, right? You are literally giving these people like the luxury of life while the rest of you are the peasants, right? So to me, anybody who has watched this whole podcast up until this point should be reevaluating where they're sitting, right? This should give you a huge wake-up call and reevaluating how you are perceiving your seat inside this mainstream Christian church.
I have to agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know whether the company that bought Unispace, whether they've been able to maintain the sales and the margins but anyway.
Yeah.
So to sum up, as far as I'm concerned, anyone in the brethren who watches this, particularly responsible people, if you get to see this, if you think that the way Bruce Hales is acting and persons that are close to him, if you think that that's the way that you regard that Christ would act, and or that a Christian should act, well, I'm sorry for you, because you've never experienced Christ the way that I have. And it's pretty clear to me that Bruce is he's just a smart, ruthless, cold, calculating, ordinary man. He's not an infallible man of God. He's not anything special. But I just can't get over the way that, like, it seems so blindingly obvious to me that Bruce just loves money. And Scripture's quite clear about the love of money. It's the root of all evil. The way that lives have been destroyed, businesses destroyed, why haven't the brethren rebelled before now? Why hasn't there been an uprising about it? Why can't anybody see it? He's just, a web has been woven around everybody to tie them all into this big empire, and to the point where nobody can even leave if they want to. So I'd just like to make an appeal that, to anybody that watches this, if you're in the brethren, the man that's at the head of all this, he's not the personification of Christ. He's just a very smart, ordinary man.
Businessman.
He's a smart businessman. If you can make a stand, you need to make a stand. But it might cost you a lot to make a stand. But, or what I've proved anyway is that God can make it up. He can make it up many times over. What the cost that you incur by making a stand, it can be made up to you. So, that's about all I've got to say about this. I don't know.
It's been fascinating, Steve, and I've been waiting for this because, like a couple of years ago, Damien Hasty had been doing a lot of calculations. He's very, very good at analyzing the big financial picture. He'd been doing a lot of calculations about the global income of the whole brethren ecosystem, and more specifically in the UK, where all the companies have to file their accounts publicly. He'd got all the numbers for the Grace Trust, for OneSchool Global, for the businesses. And what emerged from it is that the money that the brethren are taking ostensibly for education is many times larger than any possible cost of the education. The cost of educating a student is a very well-known number because all the governments have to do. It costs X many £1,000s to take a child from 5 to 18 and educate them. So we know they've got 9,500 students. We know what it should cost to educate students. And yet
I see.
A multiple of that sum is pouring into Unispace, OneSchool Global, Campus & Co., all these many entities. And the question is, where's the surplus going? It's like filling a bathtub with the taps full on, but it never fills up. And then you notice that the plug is dangling over the side. And in this case, OneSchool Global is the bathtub. All the initiatives and all the brethren's donations are pouring in, but the bathtub's never full because there's a hole in the bottom. And where does that money go? It goes to Bruce Hales and friends. So that's my sort of basic economics lesson. So we knew there was a hole in the bathtub, but Steve, thank you. You've come forward and pointed out to us exactly where the plug hole is and where the money's going. And I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. I agree.
I
think this is one of the biggest ones.
So I just want to recap to put things into perspective here. $80 million is equivalent to $1,450 from every PBCC member, $250,000 from each congregation, $8,421 from every OSG student. That is lining the pockets of millionaires. And I do think it's super important when people like yourself, Steve, come forward and break the narrative, right? We've talked about this on podcast after podcast after podcast, is that those people who come forward and are brave enough to tell their story, they break the narrative in people's minds inside there, and then they're able to put the pieces together. Then all of a sudden they find themselves with one foot in and one foot out, right? Yeah. And then they start collecting their database around them and being able to see through things to make that exit. There is so many people in there in that position with one foot in and one foot out. And I would say right now is probably one of the most potent times for people to come forward with their stories. I don't care if you've been out since Aberdeen. I don't care if you just left. I don't care if you think that your story is not worth it. Every single story resonates with somebody inside there. Every experience that you have had will resonate with somebody in there. And I've had a lot of conversations with people this last week where, again, they feel like, well, you know, I don't know if my story, if it's got enough in it. And I'm like, it doesn't matter. You could sit there and come on and tell a story that may seem very, very simple to you, but somebody inside there is going to connect to your heart. They're going to connect to your spirit and be able to relate to you in some way. And you are that person that all of a sudden puts that sister or brother inside there with one foot in and one foot out. And that's where we need people. We need people that have one foot in and one foot out, for them to be able to then give themselves their choice. All of a sudden they realize they have this choice that they didn't know that they had. That it's like, you know what? I don't align with these beliefs. I don't align with this corruptness. And then they realize, let's try and find a way to get out. And then all of a sudden families are all planning together of how do we get out of this? Because that's how I see it happening. And that's how we are viewing it happening right at this moment. I'd have to say, along with everybody who has been working on the front lines, this last week has probably been the busiest week since we started our podcast. Really? Everybody is waking up in there. People are waking up. And an important thing in what you're saying, though, is if families can stay together, because what happened in my case, for example, and it's happened in many other cases, I made a stand, but of course my wife and family, they've hitched their wagon to Bruce, and so it's ended up in a breakdown, and we don't necessarily want that to happen, but it's got to reach a point where if there's a man in there that's a little bit, one foot in, one foot out, say, but his wife wants to stay with the brethren. And I can understand, so many have got relatives and children and grandchildren and whatever. But they need something to say, look, this is, there has to be a total awakening within the brethren worldwide that they're following, the man they're following is not what he claims to be. And if there can be a complete awakening, so that it doesn't result in the breakup of families and relationships and so on, people can get delivered from it without enduring the pain and sorrow of the breakup of everything. That's from my point of view anyway, that's what I would be looking for. We hope that happens, right? I do know that there are a lot of people who are just starting to live their life how they want to while still being in there. And it is one way I've seen in a couple situations where the wife was still very much devout to Bruce Hales, and then they've got these interests that have been taken away from them, yet the husband's seeing through all this, and then they just start engaging in these interests, even though that they're forbidden. And then all of a sudden, the wife starts understanding and realizing what their life can look like outside of what this supposed mainstream Christian church is supposed to be. So there are a lot of people in there that are starting to just live their life the way that they want to live it. And it is a way to allow the rest of the family to come on board and see how life could be like. I don't think that any of this is going to be, it's going to be messy, right? It is going to be messy as we start finding ways that we can do this. And people don't want their families broken up, right? I mean, we've heard that from Alona, right? That many of the people, that's their biggest fear in there is the breakup of families. And so that's where this whole doctrine of separation, they built this cult very, very well. They built it on this whole doctrine of separation because they know that that is the key that can keep everybody with them, even if they don't want to be in there, right? I do believe, though, stories like yours, Steve, that come on and are exposed the way that they're exposed. People who are coming on from back in the 70s when they left, these are so important of stories to be told because it allows every generation in there to see what is what can happen when they leave and what the world can be like out here, whether you're Christian, whether you're an atheist, whatever you are, wherever your faith stands, there is a place out here for you that that is comfortable, that is sacred, that has the heart and the compassion that we all yearn for as humans. We all yearn to connect this way and be solidly accepted by each other as we are. And out here, you will find that. Yeah. And so we will, if people stay for, Steve is going to come back on and explain his story. So we are excited to dive into that next. Thank you so much, Steve, for coming on and walking us through this story. And I'm sure everybody is going to be interested in hearing your own personal story after they've watched this.
The Unispace story comes right up to date. Earlier this month, the British anti-corruption watchdog Good Law Project reported that Unispace had secured £679 million in COVID PPE orders from the UK government in single-source contracts made without competing bids being sought. Many of the goods were priced between 4 and 5 times higher than the average trade price at the time. £679 million is equivalent to 1.4 billion New Zealand dollars. The Good Law Project article says, 2nd of February 2024, Michael Gove opened the door to biggest VIP lane firm. Fervent prayers for the Conservative Party and a promise to follow up how Michael Gove's emails greased the wheels of Unispace's £679 million PPE deals with Russell Scott. Unispace Global Limited took the largest slice of the VIP lane contracts handed out by the Tories for PPE during the pandemic, landing contracts worth £679 million at some of the highest rates. Details on how they were able to secure a place on the unlawful fast-track scheme have been hidden until now. Following a 6-month Freedom of Information battle with the Cabinet Office, Good Law Project can reveal Michael Gove was lobbied by the firm in the weeks leading up to its first eye-watering PPE deal. Unispace went on to bag contracts with a combined value of $679 million, the largest total of any company pushed through the VIP lane. And these 7 contracts, issued between April and June 2020, were set at some of the highest prices per unit. 2 Unispace contracts for gowns and gloves were agreed at 5.1 and 4.1 times the average unit price paid during the pandemic for these items.
Thank you so much, Steve.
Okay. Thank you. Catch up later.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you to everyone who has supported us and stood by our side while we have come to this very crucial crossroads that we're all feeling. Please make sure that you like and subscribe to Get a Life. The more people who like and subscribe and comment helps get our algorithm out to a wider community. So it is really, really, really important that if you are inside there and you have the capability of making a fake account, please do so. Like and follow us, because that helps us get our algorithm out far and wide. And that's really what we're trying to focus on right now. So thank you so much, everyone. Until next time, much love to everybody. Bye-bye. If you're in a high-demand religious group and need help, please go to oliveleaf.network. To share your story or be a guest on the show, email info.getalife@proton.me. Check out www.get-a-life.net for Get a Life merchandise, books, and ways to support or get support. Please remember to like this video, subscribe to Get a Life, and comment.